On a sweltering city bus, an elderly black veteran asks for a seat, only to face a racist dismissal. Moments later, he's falsely accused of theft, searched, and dragged off by an angry crowd. But at the police station, a shocking revelation turns humiliation into a moment of profound, unforgettable truth. Prepare for a story where prejudice meets the staggering reality of an American hero. The midday summer heat hung heavy over the city, a thick, oppressive blanket that clung to everything. Inside bus number 24, the air was a stale, humid mess, barely stirred by the struggling air conditioning vents. The vehicle was packed, a sardine can of commuters, shoppers, and students, all jostling for space, their patience thin under the relentless sun. The cacophony of muttered conversations, rustling bags, and the constant rumble of the engine created a suffocating atmosphere. An elderly man, Walter Green, stepped onto the bus, his movements slow and deliberate. He was over 70, his skin a rich, dark hue, his face etched with the lines of a long life. He wore a faded, well-worn short-sleeved shirt and a tattered baseball cap, its brim softened by countless days of use. Despite the heat, a thin, old canvas messenger bag was clutched tightly across his chest, a familiar, comforting weight. He paused for a moment on the crowded aisle, his eyes, still sharp despite their age, scanning the packed rows for an elusive empty seat. His gaze finally landed on one, a single vacant spot next to a middle-aged white man. The man sat stiffly, impeccably dressed in a pristine, unwrinkled suit, a sleek leather briefcase gripped firmly in his lap. He radiated an air of importance, of being utterly out of place on such a mundane, crowded bus. Walter, a lifetime of respectful habits ingrained in him, took a step towards the seat. "Excuse me," Walter murmured, his voice soft, slightly raspy with age. He gestured towards the empty space. "Is this seat taken? May I sit here, please?" The white man turned his head slowly, his eyes, hidden behind expensive sunglasses, sweeping over Walter's modest attire, his dark skin, and his advanced age. A faint, almost imperceptible sneer touched the corner of his lips. His voice, when he finally spoke, was cold, laced with an immediate, dismissive judgment. "No, this seat isn't available," he stated flatly, without an ounce of warmth. Then, he added, his tone dripping with casual cruelty, "And frankly, colored people should just stand anyway." Walter's shoulders sagged, almost imperceptibly. A profound sadness flickered in his eyes, a familiar pain that had visited him countless times throughout his life. He said nothing, offered no argument, no plea. He simply stood there, a quiet, dignified sentinel in the jostling aisle, holding onto the worn strap of his messenger bag, his gaze carefully avoiding any direct eye contact with the man or anyone else on the bus. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the only shield against such casual, cutting prejudice. He just wanted to disappear, to become invisible within the packed vehicle. The bus rumbled on, the stifling heat and the close proximity of strangers creating an atmosphere of barely contained tension. Several stops passed, each a brief, noisy interlude as people pushed on and off. Walter remained standing, swaying gently with the bus's movements, his eyes fixed on some indeterminate point outside the window, lost in his own world of quiet endurance. Then, abruptly, a shrill cry shattered the mundane rhythm of the journey. The man in the suit, who had been Walter's silent tormentor, suddenly shouted, his voice laced with panic and outrage. "My wallet! Who took my wallet?" His eyes, now wide and frantic behind his expensive frames, darted around the crowded bus, sweeping over every face, every bag. His gaze landed unerringly with a chilling certainty directly on Walter, who was still standing nearby, his back slightly turned, clutching his own bag. "It was you!" the man shrieked, his voice sharp with accusation, his finger jabbing violently in Walter's direction. "You were standing right next to me. Nobody else came this close. You're the only thief here." His words were a public condemnation, a sudden, brutal spotlight cast upon the old man. A woman standing close by, eager to join the fray, quickly chimed in. "That's right. I saw him acting shifty. He looked suspicious." Her words added fuel to the fire, confirming the accusation without a shred of evidence. The bus driver, hearing the commotion, brought the vehicle to an abrupt, jarring halt. "What's going on back there?" he yelled, half turning in his seat. The internal security guard, a burly figure, moved quickly through the packed aisle, pushing past passengers, his face grim. The entire bus erupted into a chaotic clamor of whispers, pointing fingers, and fearful glances directed at Walter. The once mundane journey had devolved into a scene of accusation and mob mentality. Walter, suddenly the center of this terrifying storm, felt a wave of dizziness. His heart hammered against his ribs. He tried to speak, to defend himself, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "I didn't take it. I was just holding my own bag," he stammered, his words barely audible above the rising clamor. His eyes, wide with genuine alarm, pleaded with the disbelieving faces surrounding him. But no one was listening. The narrative had already been set. Two strong young men, emboldened by the accusation and the woman's corroboration, surged forward. They roughly seized Walter by his shoulders, their grip firm and unforgiving. Without ceremony, they began to roughly rummage through his messenger bag, pulling out its meager contents. A well-worn handkerchief, a small bottle of water, a dog-eared paperback book. No wallet. Yet, despite finding nothing, their grip on him didn't loosen. Instead, they forced him down onto a vacant seat, holding his hands tightly, pinning him in place like a common criminal. "You're getting off at the next stop," one of the young men growled, his face contorted in disgust. "We're handing you over to the police." Walter looked around, his eyes wide with a profound, terrifying helplessness. The faces of the passengers, once merely indifferent, were now hardened with suspicion and contempt. They looked at him not as an elderly man, not as a fellow human being, but as a thief, a criminal, a living embodiment of their worst prejudices. The injustice was a suffocating weight, a cold, unyielding hand clamped around his throat. He was trapped, utterly alone, in a bus full of accusers. The sweltering heat of the bus was quickly replaced by the harsh, unfiltered glare of the midday sun as Walter Green was unceremoniously marched off bus number 24. The two young men, still gripping his arms with self-righteous zeal, propelled him forward, their voices a low, constant hum of self-congratulation and condemnation. Behind them, the man in the pristine suit, the self-proclaimed victim, strode with an air of triumphant indignation, occasionally barking instructions to his impromptu captors. The collective gaze of the other bus passengers, a potent mix of curiosity and judgment, followed them, solidifying Walter's immediate status as a public offender. Every jarring step was a fresh indignity, each whispered accusation a new cut into his already weary soul. Walter, his shoulders slumped not just from age but from the suffocating weight of false accusation, said nothing. His eyes, usually so sharp, were downcast, fixed on the cracked pavement, wishing the ground would simply swallow him whole. The noise of the city, the distant sirens, the blare of car horns, it all faded into a muffled drone against the sharper, more painful sounds of his own humiliation. They arrived at a small, unassuming police precinct, a brick building that looked unremarkable amidst the urban sprawl, located just a short walk from the bus stop. Inside, the air was cooler, a blessed relief from the oppressive humidity, but the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of tension. The sterile fluorescent lights hummed, casting a flat, unforgiving glow on the worn linoleum floor. The mundane clatter of keyboards and the murmur of distant conversations filled the space, a stark contrast to the drama that had just unfolded outside. The man in the suit, his chest puffed out with indignant satisfaction, practically burst through the station doors, dragging Walter by the arm. He marched directly to the front desk, where a young police officer, barely out of the academy if his fresh face and earnest demeanor were any indication, stood ready to receive complaints. "I want to file a report immediately," the man in the suit declared, his voice ringing with self-importance, oblivious to the fact that he was already out of breath. He gestured dramatically at Walter, who stood passively, his quiet dignity a stark counterpoint to the man's agitation. "This old man here, he stole my wallet, right off the bus." The young officer, whose name tag read Officer Chun, remained commendably calm. He surveyed the scene with a level, professional gaze, taking in the accusatory man, the two eager young men still holding Walter, and the silent, stoic figure of Walter himself. His eyes rested on Walter's faded jacket and the gentle tremor in his hands. "Sir, are you absolutely certain?" Officer Chun asked, his voice even devoid of immediate judgment. It was a standard question, but it carried an unexpected weight in the charged air. He pulled out a fresh notepad, uncapped his pen, and began to formally record the incident, his movements precise and methodical. He then turned to Walter. "Sir, I'll need to see your state ID." The request was routine, part of the standard procedure for any individual accused of a crime. Walter, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weariness of decades, reached for the worn leather wallet tucked inside his messenger bag, his hand still trembling slightly. Just as Walter's fingers grazed his wallet, a sudden, frantic energy burst into the quiet precinct. The main doors swung open with a bang, and a woman rushed in, panting, her face flushed from exertion. Her eyes, wide and anxious, scanned the room, then lit up as she spotted the bus driver, who had accompanied the group. In her outstretched hand, she held up a brown leather wallet, its surface smooth and recognizable. "Excuse me," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "Did anyone lose a wallet? I just found this on the floor of bus number 24, under a seat in the third row." A palpable wave of stunned silence washed over the entire police station. The mundane sounds of the precinct seemed to vanish, replaced by the sudden, deafening quiet. The accused, the accusers, the officers, every head snapped towards the woman and the wallet in her hand. Officer Chun, his pen frozen over his notepad, slowly reached out and took the wallet from her. He opened it carefully, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he cross-referenced the identification inside. It was indeed a match. The driver's license, the credit cards, all bore the name of the man in the pristine suit. The man in the suit, whose face had been a picture of indignant accusation moments before, now turned a ghastly shade of ashy white. His jaw dropped, and he stumbled back a step, his triumphant posture collapsing into one of utter shock and dawning horror. The two young men who had so eagerly apprehended Walter immediately released his arms, their faces now mirroring the suit-clad man's mortification. Officer Chun, after confirming the wallet's owner, was about to return Walter's state ID card. As he slid it out, his eyes briefly scanned the name printed on it, Walter Green. Then, his gaze dropped lower, to a smaller, almost imperceptible inscription on the card, and his breath hitched. His eyes snapped back to the face of the old man, a look of profound disbelief, then dawning reverence, sweeping across his features. "Wait, Walter Green," Officer Chun murmured, his voice barely a whisper, then louder, laced with an almost reverent awe. He looked from the ID to Walter, then back again. "Sir, this says Lieutenant General Walter Green?" His voice trembled with a sudden, overwhelming realization. He snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight, his gaze fixed on Walter with a level of respect that bordered on veneration. You're the hero who shot down enemy planes during the war, the legendary ace, the one who famously led the charge at the Battle of Cahill, saving countless lives." His words, delivered with a stunned reverence, echoed through the suddenly hushed station. The revelation hit the precinct like a thunderclap. Every officer, every civilian, every person present in the station was utterly stunned. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Faces, previously etched with suspicion or indifference, now contorted in disbelief, then profound shame. Whispers erupted, but these were whispers of awe and horrified realization. "Lieutenant General, that Walter Green." Walter, the subject of this sudden, overwhelming spotlight, remained remarkably still. He simply stood there, his shoulders, though thin and weary, holding an unexpected weight of dignity. His eyes, which had been downcast, now seemed to well up, a raw, burning sensation of unshed tears. He was not crying from sadness, but from the sudden, unexpected acknowledgement, and perhaps, the lingering pain of all the times he hadn't been seen. The air in the police station, previously tense with accusation, now felt heavy as lead, stifling under the oppressive weight of revealed truth and collective guilt. The man in the suit, utterly mortified, began to stammer, his words barely coherent. It must have fallen out when the bus jolted," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding Walter's eyes, avoiding everyone's eyes. He took a hesitant step forward, extending a trembling hand. I apologize, sir. I am so terribly sorry, General." His voice was a pathetic whisper, devoid of its earlier arrogance. Officer Chen's eyes, usually so calm, now blazed with a righteous fury. He fixed a piercing stare on the man in the suit, his voice cutting like a knife through the thick silence. "You dragged Lieutenant General Walter Green here," he began, each word a hammer blow of condemnation. "You humiliated him in front of an entire bus full of people. You illegally searched his personal belongings. You were ready to have him handcuffed. And now you say, it must have fallen out?" His voice rose, the anger simmering beneath the surface, fueled by the sheer injustice and systemic prejudice. "How is it that, in this day and age, we still see such blatant discrimination against black people? Do you know how many black men and women have valiantly protected this country? They are an integral, indispensable part of the United States of America." His words were a passionate defense, a rebuke not just of one man's actions, but of a persistent, ugly truth. Walter said nothing. He simply tightened his grip on the strap of his old messenger bag, a silent anchor in the whirlwind of emotions. He took a single, deliberate step back, towards the glass doors of the precinct, his gaze steady, profound, and utterly unreadable. The entire police station fell utterly silent again. The man in the suit squirmed, desperate to escape the condemning stares of the officers and the few civilians present. He withered under the intense scrutiny. Walter, reaching the door, paused. He turned his head slightly, his eyes resting for a moment on the man in the suit. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. His voice, when it came, was soft, a mere whisper, like a passing breeze, yet it carried the immense weight of his quiet dignity and unshakable wisdom. "Just hold onto your wallet tighter next time," he said. A simple, profound statement that held no malice, only a weary instruction, a final, understated lesson. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the blinding sunlight, back into the bustling world. He was free, physically unburdened by false accusation. But his shoulders, despite his freedom, still seemed to carry an invisible weight, a slight, enduring stoop that had nothing to do with age. It was the crushing burden of suspicious glances, the insidious wounds of prejudice, a pain that the battlefields of old had never been able to inflict, but which the casual biases of today continued to deeply cut. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts or opinions about this story, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel to support us. Your support means the world. Thank you again.